the Living Farms podcast, the place where we discuss biodynamic practices worldwide for you, your farm, and the planet.
So welcome to the Living Farms podcast. Today we have Clara Behr here with us. Welcome, Clara.
Thank you. Welcome.
You're working as the Head of Policy and Public Relations for the Biodynamic Federation Demeter International for 3 years now. And for me, this is a really exciting episode because I wanted to dive with you into the topic of biodynamics and policy advisory work and political development. So that's great to have you here.
Yes, I'm looking forward.
So maybe you can guide us how you came in contact with biodynamics and what kind of work you're currently involved with and what you are doing and why you're with biodynamics.
Yes, so actually my encounter with biodynamics was quite random. I was looking for a policy job in Brussels, and I had a look at several platforms with EU policy positions. And I saw that the Biodynamic Federation Demeter International was hiring a new head of policy and public relations. I had never heard of biodynamics before. I had heard of Demeter because I'm French and German. And in Germany, of course, the Demeter brand is quite well known. So I knew the Demeter brand. I knew it just to be a really good organic standard or one of the best organic standards that you could buy. So that was the only knowledge that I had. But when I saw the job opening and I had a look into what the Biodynamic Federation Demeter International is, and when I discovered about biodynamic farming and so on, I thought that it would be a really good adventure and it would be a great opportunity. Mainly because I was convinced that, of course, we need more sustainable farming practices. Farming has a major impact on climate, but at the same time, farming can actually contribute to tackle climate change. So in that sense, there is a huge responsibility. But I also really had the motivation to work for farmers, people that are feeding us, people that are nurturing the soil, the world, the animals, and us humans, so that have actually a really important position. And so I think that dual motivation was really when I looked at the position and at what the Biodynamic Federation was, I thought that this was actually something I would really like to work for. And that's how I started working. And so far for the policy work, so we have been focusing mainly on plant breeding. So 2 topics that are included in plant breeding. It's the uprising now of new GMOs. And also we work a lot on seeds in general, so making biodynamic and organic seeds more available, developing further biodynamic and organic seeds. And another topic that we follow is animal welfare, because animals have a very important place and role in biodynamic farming. So we try to support also political development around animal welfare. And then there are many other topics. I think we will take us a whole over hour to talk about it, but maybe we'll touch upon them later on.
So that's interesting because when you said that you have never heard before about biodynamics, you must have read a lot of things, and you may find that there are also some critical voices. So how did you filter these different informations, or did you just follow your intuition, or how did you do that?
Yeah, I did a lot of background work, and of course I read about Steiner and the agricultural course and anthroposophy, and there I came across a lot of criticism and accusations about biodynamics being esoteric or anti-scientific. So I was very rapidly confronted with that. I think I didn't really follow my intuition. What I really followed was mainly what I looked was at the farmers, what the farmers were actually doing. So I had a look at some Demeter farms around the place I was living in Germany, or other farms that I knew around, also that you could encounter on the different web pages of the member organizations of the FDI. And I saw what what they were doing on the ground, how they treated the animals, how they nurtured the soil, how they cultivated plants. And I think when you see what they're doing and you see that actually they don't need any chemical inputs at all, but manage to do that all without them, manage to have animals that are actually looking well and are behaving like animals and not like what you see in most industrial livestock farming. And I think that was really, for me, the convincing part. Is like when you look at what the farmers are doing and you see how great they are, and how everything is actually really different than on a conventional farm or on other types of farming, and all the contribution they are doing for climate, biodiversity, and so on. So then I would say maybe I had the intuition, or I was certain that this was a really tremendous agricultural practice that should be put forward, and that was my main motivation. Of course, I would say, I mean, it's biodynamic farming is one of the ways that you can make farming more sustainable. Organic, agroecology, and some regenerative practice are also very interesting. But I think biodynamics really has a complete dimension to farming that is really a great example.
That resonates a lot what you just said, because also when I joined the biodynamic movement, I was working for organics for quite some time, but I didn't came across biodynamics so much before working for the section for agriculture. And for me, it was also the farms that were most convincing, so to say. And I also had the feeling that it's quite a sophisticated and holistic approach for farming. And it's not bad to join this movement, so to say, as an outsider and get to know it when you have to speak with other people. Or I mean, if I can imagine if you speak with policymakers or people doing policy work, they are often not aware of biodynamic farming. And so this outsider position at the beginning may have given you an entrance level to speak with the policymakers. Or is that a wrong?
Yeah, I think we are still at the beginning, to be honest. There's still a lot of work to be done to make biodynamic farming more known, especially on the political sphere. So it's still a work in progress, and it's an every day-to-day job, in a way. What is really good, I think, is that biodynamic farming can really serve as best practice examples when it comes to making farming more sustainable and addressing climate change, and making a difference, basically. So that is a real asset that we have, and that I frequently put forward. So I frequently really base what we advocate for on examples and good practices to actually show that this is possible and this is already happening and it can be transposed on other examples. So that's also why we are now involved in an EU project called the Pathways Project, and it's investigating how livestock farming can be more sustainable. And we have several Demeter farmers that are serving as best practice examples in that EU-wide project. That's a really interesting experience for us, but also a great contribution for the project. So this is one side. I mean, this capacity of providing best practice examples. But I would say our other strength is really this holistic approach that you mentioned, because that is really different from other types of farming, that we really consider everything as a whole and we really look at the bigger picture in a way. And I think this is a major contribution and something that we really have to stress out when it comes to political work, because most of the time policy regulations are really just tackling one piece of the puzzle, but they're really losing this holistic perspective. And I think this is what, at least in my work, I try to remind all the time. Is like, you cannot make sustainability by making one plant more drought resistant, by using NGTs, for instance. I mean, this new genomic techniques, new generation of GMOs, for instance, that cannot be a solution. I mean, the only solution is to look at the whole farming system and to make it sustainable on the whole, and not just by tackling one plant variety for one type of disease or one type of climate change negative impact. So here, that's really one thing that we have to stress and that we have to advocate for. But this is really difficult. in a way that, because most policymakers really don't have this holistic perspective at all. They are experts in their own areas of work. They are experts of such tiny portions of the puzzle that they have really good expertise in that. So that's for sure. But they really lose this global approach that actually you need, because a farm is not just one crop, one plant. It's a whole combination of biodiversity, of soil fertility, of humans, of animals, of plant interactions. So it's much more complex and you cannot isolate the different elements from each other.
And that's often a challenge when I worked also in policy, recommendations or something like this from the scientific part, that you just said that policymakers often work in their field of expertise, and then it's difficult to make them understand how a holistic approach could impact the different areas. But what are the reactions if you explain them to the policymakers that biodynamic farming is really this holistic thinking, and that it's a system that tries to have win-win-win-win situations, so to say? Do they understand this more and more, or is it still a challenge to go there?
Yeah, I think there's definitely increasing openness. So they're definitely more open-minded than before. And some even approach us to learn more about biodynamics and try to understand how it works and what actually biodynamic is. So there's definitely an openness. I think for most policy makers, then the main difficulty is to transpose this to a wider and global scale. So the main question that they have, I mean, I think they kind of see that it works. And I think in some level, I mean, not all of them, of course, but quite some policymakers can be convinced that biodynamic farming is actually a sustainable way of farming, not only from an environmental perspective, but also from an economical perspective. But they're really resistant when it comes to the global scale, transposing it to a global scale. And this is mainly due to the fact that the lobbying from the agro, industrial and biotech industry is very, very strong. And there is a lot of money at stake. So I think the resistance to really make fundamental changes to the farming model that we are currently in is really, really big. And so I think this is actually our major obstacle. I think most of the time it's not really about biodynamic farming being esoteric or so on. I mean, maybe for a few of them that plays a role, but for most of them, it's actually this resistance to make a cut in this global farming system that we are in. I mean, in the EU, if you have a look just at the EU, farmers make a living out of subsidies most of the time. This is actually not economically viable model at all. And so, of course, they cannot afford to cut the subsidies, but they have to link the subsidies to certain farming practices, or to at least, tie them to something. And then the big question is what? So for a long time, we had a system that basically the more hectares you had, the more subsidies you got. And this is now being more and more questioned. So it's a good thing. But I think still the political will to make a real transition to something really sustainable is still lacking. And I think actually now in the energy sector, we see that we had some really major changes, but also because we faced a major energy crisis. So perhaps I'm not being very optimistic here, but perhaps we need to face a really major food crisis to make real transition. I hope not. But for now, there's just not enough political willingness to make a real change. And still, I think the agro-industry lobby is still very strong. There's a lot of money at stake. And so they are pushing really hard to maintain the current model in place.
So I also hear that when you say if the farmers see how biodynamics is practiced, that this becomes more lively and clear, so to say. So this is one of the very big advantages that I see for biodynamic farmers, which have been practiced for 20 and more years, and now they're better off with climate change because they just have this healthy soils and they just have a running system which is much better off than the conventional farmers sometimes is. But do you manage to get the policymakers then also on the farms and to really see the practices, or is there still a gap or a separation between policymakers making decisions and not knowing exactly how a, let's say, European farm looks like?
Yeah, so it's definitely something we are trying to, is to bring policymakers to the field and to visit biodynamic farms. It's something that we usually try to work on. Also sometimes with the organic movement together, that we take them to see organic and biodynamic farms. So this is definitely something that we do. I think it helps for sure. It's always very good when a policymaker has actually an in practice experience and really sees it with his own eyes and can feel the farm. So it's definitely very helpful. I think the bridge between actually farmers and policymakers is still a wide bridge. You would still take some time to cross it, to go from one side to the other, definitely. There's improvement on that path. But I think, yes, it's also mainly due to the fact that most policymakers have actually made long studies and never had really a farm experience. So you really have to look closely to find a farmer that has to find a policymaker that has an own farm experience. Although now, for instance, in the members of the European Parliament, there are very few, but we still have a few farmers. And so that is very good that they are in the parliament and can share their experiences from the ground, basically.
Mm. And another point that you touched upon is also the question of how to bridge the gap of this understanding of farming as what kind of consequences it has. So, for example, in the European Union, I've found that often farming is looked at such a limited factor for production and just on this farm, and the gates are closed. But when you look at the bigger picture, for example, for climate change, you will realize that our food system is much larger and has much bigger implications for our sustainable future than just the farm gates. And that is also something which is, I have the feeling, currently changing in the policy area, that we really try to merge the different aspects, but still I found for the food system, it's still a big task to do, also for the policymakers to understand this bigger systems in a way.
Yes, it's true. As I mentioned previously, so I think, of course, agriculture has an impact on climate change, but it can actually also have a positive impact and reverse this negative impact. But in that sense, it plays a big role because we have other sectors that have consequences on climate change, but don't have the capacity to reverse it. We just need to stop using them. So it's a whole different situation with agriculture. I think it is now changing, though. I mean, even the last IPCC report that was published showed how agriculture could actually reverse the situation and how it could play a really important role in tackling climate change. So it's definitely something that is now gaining interest and importance, and really, I think it's changing slowly but surely. I think one thing that you never have to, I think it's often really hard for people to grasp a bit the political world, because most of the time in politics, things take a lot of time. You have to be very patient. And even the slight change, the slight impulse takes years to really transform into something concrete. So I think we have that impulse now. We just need to roll it out and work on it to push it further. So I think we have to be patient. And I know it's a bit contradictory, but because actually with climate change, we don't really have time. So we are a bit always in this tendency that things take time, and you also need time to find good solutions and to think them through and make them work, and be sure that it's actually a good solution. And on the other hand, we are losing time because climate change and biodiversity collapse is now becoming more and more important. So we are always between those two tendencies all the time and navigating between that. And I think that's actually a really difficult task for a policymaker at the same time. So, yes. I think also to come back on your question before, because you asked about this bridge between policymakers and farmers. I think most of the time what is also making the situation really difficult is what I was already touching several times in our discussion, is the power of the agro-industry lobby, which most of the time actually don't really represent farmers, or at least not the small-scale farming, peasants farming, small organic farmers, or people practicing agroecology and things like that. They really represent industrial farming. And I think they still are in the driving seat. They're still really listened by policymakers, and this is also why the picture of the farmers, or actually the messaging from the farmers, is really difficult to come through to policymakers, because most of the time it's what they hear is the agro-industry lobby. And at the moment, if we look, for instance, at what's happening with this new generation of GMOs, it's the biotech industry that is really, really strong, and that is listened to. So I think if we want to tackle this bridge between policymakers and farmers, it's also by making this lobbying from the agro and biotech industry less stronger.
And there I see one big responsibility of communications, because you're also involved in communication work for BFDI, and I found it extremely confusing to understand and to realize what kind of advertisement or what kind of lobbying is done from the big industry, because they are also more and more promoting, let's say, a sustainable agriculture and promoting climate change mitigation and adaptation measures and diverse crop cultures and so on. But when you look at the programs in more detail, you will often find that it's a superficial answer to the challenges that we face currently. And I was just wondering, like, could there be also, in that sense, a potential of biodynamics to work with such big industries to, let's say, change the system from from another perspective, or would, like, what would you say with working with those partners as well?
Yeah, I think that's a very difficult question, because the variety of partners is very big. So you actually have some actors that really want to make a change and just struggle to find a good solution and make tiny steps. So with both actors, we could collaborate and we could work further. But then you also really have the ones that are actually just trying to bring their products on the market and convince consumers that they are sustainable, when in reality, if you have a detailed look at what they are putting in place, or at how everything is working, you see that it's very limited and often not even correspond to actually a real change. So that's exactly what we see now with this new generation of GMOs, is like now they are trying to take off labeling for GMOs, which is mandatory so far in the EU, and it was also in other countries in the world. There is also a big trend ongoing now in Canada, for instance, and they want to remove the traceability and labeling requirements. And their main aim to do that is because consumers actually don't want to buy GMOs. But if they don't have labeling, you have no idea that you have a GM organism in the product that you're buying, so you might buy it. And now they're even going a step further. They're saying, yeah, but if these new GMOs can contribute to sustainability, why don't we make a sustainability label on the package? So you could actually have a product that has a sustainability label, but that has a GMO inside, but you don't know, because there's no mandatory labeling anymore for GMOs, but it's marketed as a sustainable product. So I think for the consumer, that's really a deceiving product then, and that's a real issue actually towards freedom of choice. But I'm speaking here about consumers, but it actually really also concerns farmers, because if they don't know the seeds that they are buying, if they don't know that they are made with GM techniques, if they cannot have a choice to farm without or with GMOs. So I think farmers still have a choice to make. Some farmers might want to use them, but some other farmers don't. So I think it's really important that they have this position. And I think, so this is, for instance, the type of partners that, of course, we couldn't collaborate with, because it goes intrinsically against the core values of biodynamic farming. For us, GMO-free farming is not a question. It's per se a core value of biodynamic farming. So it's really not an easy question. I mean, it's true that we have to promote change and we have to encourage sustainable practices. I think the one way to do it is not mainly by encouraging or by collaborating with partners, but it's more by promoting what is actually sustainable, what actually works, and trying to bring it forward at policy level so that it gets incorporated in regulations and becomes something that is then validated and that is used. So I think this is sometimes a better way to achieve change.
And this is not often the case that was done in the past from farmers or from people working in biodynamic or also organic organizations. So like policy work, I would say, for the organic and in particular biodynamic sector is quite a young thing to do. And yeah, I wouldn't say you're alone with this work, but you're one of the fighters in the front, so to say. And do you think that more people would be needed to really effectively promote biodynamics also in policy making and policy advisory services?
Yeah, so I mean, it's true that policy work on organic farming, biodynamic farming is very young. I mean, we just, I mean, basically all the organic regulations that you have in the world are quite recent. I mean, it's not a regulation that exists in 50 years. I mean, most of them are very young. So it all started not such a long time ago. Thankfully, we are not alone. So we have allies, not only in the organic movement, but also for instance, from the agroecological movement, from peasant farmers and so on. But also from environmental NGOs that often can be real allies when it comes to tackling biodiversity and issues like that. So, for instance, on this GMO question, we work a lot with environmental organizations. But for sure, we could be much more people. I think I mentioned before that the lobbying of the agro-biotech industry is very strong. It's also because they have a lot of resources that we don't have. And that makes a huge difference. If you have a lot of people that can meet with policymakers, that can write papers, that can meet members of the parliament, that can bring the ideas forward, be present and very active on social media and communicate a lot. Of course, that makes a big difference than if you are only a really handful of people and you struggle to cope with everything that you have to do. And we could also, it's not only about the organic regulations, but now we see that, yes, there are regulations all the time on animal welfare. Now we will have one in the EU on seeds and GMOs, so these will be very important. But there are regulations on a lot of fields that concern farming where we should really be active because they concern biodynamic farming. And for that, we would need definitely more people. Yes, I think if I had one wish, it would be to have more people involved, definitely.
And what kind of, like, what would be your dream scenario, so to say? Which kind of topics would you handle, and where do you see potentials to strengthen the policy work in the future?
That's a really difficult question because my wish list is very long.
Top.
It could really last a while. I think for now, actually, it's not so much about, I think, of course, on top on the wish list would be that biodynamic farming is more recognized and more, and basically has more value in all regulation and is taken as example, and or even that, for instance, some biodynamic practices can be taken upon in several regulations. So that would be great already. That would be a great achievement. I think if we could make it. And I mean, there are definitely some things that are improved. So, for instance, now in the EU, they're reforming the whole animal welfare regulation. It's a huge package of different regulations. And one thing that we brought forward was we asked to stop mutilations on animals, and especially dehorning of cows, because as you know, in biodynamic farming, we consider that the cows are part of the horns are part of the cows, sorry. And so this is something that is really important. So we advocated for that. And now, for instance, there was already a first leaked version. So it's not an official publication yet, but it's a leaked version in which this point was actually taken upon. So we don't know yet if it will be in the official published version, but the fact that it is mentioned in a leaked draft is already a really big step forward. I think 20 years ago, we could not, even in my wildest dreams, I could not have imagined that the European Commission would even envision such a ban of mutilation, and especially of the dehorning. So I think on that side, we already have some improvements, and we can see that biodynamic farming can actually make a difference. But on the other hand, as I was speaking about GMOs, very high on my wish list at the moment is that we maintain the current regulation in place for GMOs, not only in Europe, but everywhere in the world. We do not call for a ban. If people want to use them, they can use them, but we need traceability, we need labeling, we need risk assessment. Otherwise, I think if we let that train pass, then we will have even more GM products on our shelves, on our farms. And that will have consequences on our health, on our environment. And the issue is that we still don't know about these consequences because we need more scientific evidence. We need more research on that. And so I can really only urge everyone that has a moment to spare to spread the word about this new generation of GMOs, to raise awareness, because people are not aware, consumers are not aware. And we really need to make, because the more people will be aware and concerned about it, the more the policymakers will have a pressure when it comes to changing the current regulation, and the more we can win this whole debate. So I think this is really important at the moment.
So this again would mean to strengthen communication from the farms to the consumers, from the consumers to the people that work in the different organizations, and to really make this system approach more visible and more understandable in a way. Or
yes, exactly. And it's not only the farmers. I mean, of course, the farmers have a role, but I think every one of us has a role actually when it comes to choosing the food that we buy, when it comes to supporting the farmers by our everyday choices. And when it comes also to discussing with our friends and families, what type of future do we want? What type of society do we want? What type of food and farming do we want? And I think I think it's a shared responsibility. And when it comes to GMOs, I think, we can all choose not to have GMOs on our field and plate. And that is something really important.
And I may add, not just on our plates, but also on our clothes and in our living. I mean, that's also often a part that is neglected in a way that that with GMO. I mean, if you look at cotton,
BT cotton is very big in India, for instance.
It's a big thing.
how a lot of clothes are made in the world. So definitely, yes, definitely, it has a much wider impact than just the food we are eating. Because the food we are eating and how it grows also has a direct impact on the climate, the soil, the environment, the animals, and then in return to human health. So I think definitely it has a much wider impact.
Yeah. But rumor has it that also the topic of clothing and textile new chances of textiles are discussed in BFDI. So,
Exactly, but not only in the FDI. Actually, there are now a few countries that are also working on regulations on organic textiles. So I think things are moving, and that's a really good thing, because also in the textile industry, there's a lot of room for improvement.
That's true. So how would you say, like, for those people who are not really communication experts, but more or less maybe would like to support policy work in general, what kind of possibilities do you see for people to support the work you and your colleagues are doing exist?
Yes, I think if you don't have a lot of time but still want to do something, you can simply share what we post and publish. So whether on our social media, on our website, so you can simply share that with your friends and families and everyone you know, so that people have an understanding and know what's ongoing. That's one thing. But you can also try to see if you have local farmers around you that you could support. So that would be another way. You can also always reach out to me if you want to be more involved and have more information. We have all our contact details on our website. And I think the main thing is really to spread the word and questioning what you're eating, what you are buying, what you are choosing every day, and sharing the world about and the news about what's going on, and that will be already a very important thing. And if you are very motivated, and also don't hesitate to address your members of parliament, your politicians. They actually normally are supposed to listen to citizens. And you can always send them a letter or reach out to them, try to have a meeting and so on. And so that we can help you. So I think don't be shy, but reach out to them. They are elected by the citizens, so they have to listen to the citizens. And you would be surprised, but sometimes you can really have a meeting with a member of the parliament, even if you thought that was never possible, and they will actually listen to you. So I think that you can always do.
That's a nice point. You just mentioned don't be shy. This is also my experience with policymakers, that if you have the time and really approach them, they're often very open to listening. And as you said, sometimes big changes can happen overnight, and other changes may take some time, but I think it's definitely worth to to go for those changes. And at the end of the podcast, I'm always asking my my guests the question of, what are your 3 main reasons to continue the work in the biodynamic movement, and to continue to work in the policy sector and implement changes, although it might take some time to see the results?
Yes, I mean, I think the main reason is exactly the same than what I mentioned in the beginning. I mean, I think I really want to try to make change in the agricultural system and to bring forward more sustainable farming practices, and biodynamic farming is really, I think, one of the best ways to achieve that. So this is my main reason to continue. It's because I think it's really urgently needed, and even if it's difficult, and even if it might not happen tomorrow, I think it's still the way we need to go for, if we really want to tackle all these climate change issues that we are facing and that we will face even more in the coming years. I think it's really urgently needed, so that would be the first main reason to continue. The second one is also, I think, you mentioned don't be shy, but I also think one of the main things is that you always have to try. You just have to try. At least you will have tried. If you don't succeed, then that's okay. But at least you will have tried. And I think because it is so urgently needed, we need to do everything we can, and we need to try everything we can, and not always play by the book, but just try it and be basically front and try new things and bring biodynamic farming forward and really push for change. So yeah, I think you really always have to try and then you see how things go forward. Yeah, and the last reason is really to always support the farmers. They do a wonderful work. They are giving us the food that is absolutely necessary to survive, but they also treat the soil that we are working on. They treat our environment, they treat the animals, they care for biodiversity, they care for so many things that go just beyond food. And I think we just owe it to them to support them and to make sure that they can continue practicing farming in the best way possible. And a lot of them are really engaged and really want to do their best and always, exactly like me, they always try to do their best and to make a change and to improve their farming methods and the situation on their farm. And so I think we really owe it to them to at least approach policymakers and try to make things better for them on the ground. So one example that I would give as well, that, for instance, one of the things Demeter farmers pushed a lot for was to be able to practice on-farm slaughter, because we have a huge problem now with the accessibility of slaughterhouses. There are less and less slaughterhouses everywhere, so animals have to travel really long distances. The conditions in the slaughterhouses are often really poor. And for a lot of farmers, it's actually really disturbing and really sad to see their animals going that way. I mean, they don't nurture them for years just to give them up in such poor conditions. So one of the things that they really try to advocate for was to be able to practice on-farm slaughter. And now actually at EU level, we have now some lighter requirements, and the situation has improved. It's still not perfect. There are still things to obtain and to make things easier for the farmers on the ground. But there have been some changes, and that's really good. That's a step forward to making that easier. So that's one example, for instance, how we can facilitate the life on the ground, on the farm, for the farmers on an everyday scale.
Thank you so much, Clara. It's good that we know and have heard now what you're doing in the policy work and how you managed to move forward in this area. And I hope maybe some of the listeners will follow your footsteps and talk to the politicians and talk to the customers and the customers to farmers and so on. So to really get this network going and to increase in the future. Thank you very much for being here with us. And
thanks a lot. I hope it will be an inspiration for many listeners today.
Thank you.